My brother tried to take over the family business by telling everyone I was incompetent. He said, "You should just step aside." I brought up his fake invoices at the next board meeting. He got voted out. It started small, like cracks that spider out from a windshield chip. I guess that's how these things often go. You miss the signs because you're too close to it all. My name's Fergus, and for most of my life, I've been running what my dad called the heart of the Hartnell family, Hartnell Hardware. It's a string of hardware stores around southern Illinois, about 8 in total. Nothing glamorous, but steady. Dependable. Like my dad used to say, people will always need tools, son. I spent my childhood sweeping the shop floors, stocking shelves, and trying to learn everything about the business. By the time I hit college, I knew every tool and every nail on the shelves. My dad taught me the hard way, and I wouldn't have had it any different. Now, my brother Lyle? Different story. He was always the charmer. He had this natural gift for making you feel like you were the only person in the room, for convincing people of things they didn't even know they wanted. He could talk circles around anyone, and I used to admire it, sometimes even envy it. Lyle wasn't exactly reckless, but, well, let's just say he didn't have the same grounded approach to life that I did. Growing up, he was the kid who got into trouble but always seemed to wiggle out of it with some grin and a shrug, while I was the one who'd get a lecture for letting it happen. When Dad had his first heart attack, things shifted. He'd spent decades building the business up, and it took a toll. My mom, Anne, and I thought he'd pull through, but the doctors told us the hard truth: Dad needed to slow down. And for the first time in my life, he actually listened. "Fergus," he'd told me from his hospital bed, his voice thin and barely louder than the beeping machines around him, "you were born for this. The business is in your blood. You'll take care of it, won't you?" I nodded, barely able to speak. "I will, Dad. Always." He patted my hand, his grip weak but resolute. "Good. Make sure Lyle's involved, too. The two of you together, that's what your mom and I want." It was a nice thought, I'll admit. But a part of me wondered if Dad really believed that. I loved my brother, don't get me wrong, but he hadn't exactly been the family man over the years. Still, I made a promise, and I intended to keep it. When I offered Lyle a spot in the business, he looked surprised. And then his surprise morphed into something that made me a little uneasy, a sly grin, like he'd just been waiting for me to come begging. "Fergie, you sure you want me in there?" he asked, leaning back on his chair, arms crossed over his chest. "I mean, I know the family name's important and all, but let's be real, you're the one who lives and breathes hardware stores. I'm more of an idea guy." "Ideas are good," I replied, forcing a smile. "We could use some fresh ideas." "Well," he said, lifting his drink to his lips with that same smirk, "I'll think about it." I chuckled, thinking he was just playing hard to get. Looking back, maybe I should have recognized that smirk for what it was. But instead, I left that night feeling almost relieved. I thought I'd dodged a bullet by getting him on board without a fuss. I never suspected he'd been planning anything. Not then, anyway. A couple of months passed, and to my surprise, Lyle threw himself into the job. At first, I was glad to see it. He took over the marketing side, a natural fit, and he was good at it. He had ideas for customer loyalty programs, new advertising campaigns, even a series of DIY with Lyle videos he posted on social media. Business picked up, and I couldn't deny his strategies were working. One night, as we were closing up, I walked into his office to find him leafing through some paperwork, his brows furrowed. "Burning the midnight oil?" I asked, knocking on the doorframe. He looked up, a flash of annoyance crossing his face before he forced a smile. "You know it. I was just checking inventory records." "Inventory?" I laughed. "I thought that was my job." He shrugged, avoiding eye contact. "Just trying to help out, keep things running smoothly." "All right," I said, giving him a pat on the shoulder. "Let me know if you need a hand." The next day, one of our suppliers, Rick, an old family friend, called me up, sounding a bit puzzled. "Fergus, did you guys change suppliers for your fasteners and screws?" he asked. "No, Rick," I replied, frowning. "Why?" "Well, I got this notice saying you're working with a new company for those." "No big deal, just surprised." I thanked him, hung up, and walked straight into Lyle's office. "Hey, did we switch suppliers for fasteners?" I asked, keeping my tone light. He barely looked up from his screen. "Yeah, I found a better rate." "A better rate?" I crossed my arms. "Rick's been with us for years. Why didn't you mention this to me?" He sighed, finally looking at me. "Look, Fergie, I'm just trying to be proactive. Thought you'd be happy I was saving us money." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to nod. "Just keep me in the loop, all right? This is a family business. We don't make decisions solo." Fine, he said, waving me off. But something in his tone made me uneasy, like he wasn't taking me seriously. I brushed it off, thinking I was overreacting. But as the weeks went on, things got weirder. One evening, I was going through invoices and noticed one from a company I didn't recognize, Olson Industrial Supply. I didn't remember Lyle mentioning this supplier, and the amount on the invoice was unusually high. But it was signed off by Lyle. I went over to his office and held the invoice up. "What's this about?" I asked. Lyle barely glanced at it. "Olson's our new supplier for a few things. They had good rates." "Better than Rick?" I pressed. He rolled his eyes. "Fergus, not everything is about loyalty. Sometimes you've got to be a little more ruthless." I stared at him, feeling my stomach turn. This wasn't the Lyle I'd grown up with. Or maybe it was, and I was just seeing it clearly for the first time. After that, things escalated. I started noticing more discrepancies, more invoices signed by Lyle for materials that either didn't show up or we'd never ordered in the first place. And Lyle? He started treating me like an underling instead of a partner, telling the employees that he was modernizing the business, pushing them to come to him instead of me for approvals. One Friday evening, after the last of the employees had gone home, I caught up with Lyle again. He was sitting at his desk, looking smug as ever. "Lyle," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "What exactly are you trying to do here?" He looked up, smirking. "Do? I'm just trying to make sure this company doesn't run into the ground because someone refuses to evolve." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my fists clenching. "I've been running this business fine for years. You come in and start changing everything without even consulting me." Lyle leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Face it, Fergus. You're stuck in the past. You're a manager, sure, but you don't have vision. This place needs someone with ambition, someone who's not afraid to take risks." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Ambition?" I scoffed. "You think ambition means lying to our suppliers? Ordering things we don't need? You're being reckless." "You wouldn't understand," he replied, his tone ice cold. "That's why I'm doing what's best for the company. You should just step aside, Fergus. Let me take things from here." My heart hammered in my chest. I'd never imagined this, my own brother, trying to push me out of the company that was as much a part of me as my own family. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, but I could see from his face that he didn't think he owed me any explanation. He really thought he was in the right. But instead of arguing, I walked out of his office. I needed proof. Cold, hard proof that I wasn't just being paranoid, that he was crossing lines that couldn't be ignored. So I stayed late, night after night, poring over records, invoices, transactions, anything with Lyle's name on it. I spent weeks gathering every shred of evidence I could find. Every strange invoice, every unusual supplier, every unnecessary order, it all went into a folder I kept locked in my desk. I was exhausted, running on caffeine and pure determination. Meanwhile, Lyle continued his act, strutting around like he already owned the place. The employees didn't know what to believe anymore. Some of them who'd known me since I was a teenager would give me looks of concern, while others whispered that maybe it was time for new leadership. One Friday night, after everyone had gone home, I sat in my office with the lights dimmed, flipping through the documents again. The numbers didn't lie. Lyle was siphoning money from the business through fake invoices, signing off on fake orders, and funneling it all to accounts I didn't recognize. He wasn't just trying to push me out, he was bleeding the company dry to fund, well, whatever life he was trying to build outside of our family business. The next morning, I knew what I had to do. I called an emergency board meeting for the following Monday. My parents would be there, of course, along with a couple of our longest-standing board members, people who'd been with the company since my dad's early days. These were people who respected honesty and hard work, and they'd trusted me to lead the company forward. I knew this would be my one chance to show them what Lyle had been doing. If I didn't make my case, he'd win, and I'd lose everything I'd spent my life building. The weekend crawled by, and by Monday morning, I felt like I hadn't slept in years. Lyle showed up, looking annoyed but smug, dressed in his best suit. I could see him eyeing me from across the conference table, that little smirk just daring me to make a scene. As everyone settled in, I stood up, clearing my throat. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," I began, glancing around the room. "There's something important we need to address." Lyle leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, looking completely unconcerned. "If this is about your outdated plans, Fergus, we've heard it all before. Maybe it's time you hand things over to someone who's not afraid of change." I ignored him, trying to keep my voice steady. "Actually, this is about the changes you've been making, Lyle. The ones you've been hiding." He narrowed his eyes, but I kept going. "I've been going through our records," I said, lifting the stack of invoices. "And I found some unusual transactions. Orders we never needed, payments to suppliers we've never worked with before, and signatures that don't add up." I spread out the documents on the table, watching as the board members leaned forward, eyebrows raised. My parents exchanged a look, my mother's face a mask of confusion and hurt. "What is this, Lyle?" My father asked, his voice quiet but firm. Explain yourself. Lyle let out a short, bitter laugh. Explain myself? This is just Fergus clinging to the past, afraid of a little competition. I was trying to bring in new suppliers to save money. It's not my fault he can't handle change. New suppliers? I shot back, my voice rising. Lyle, we're talking about thousands of dollars in orders for products we never even received. Do you have any idea what this has done to our finances? The fake orders, the inflated invoices, all of it was designed to take money out of the business. The room fell silent. One of the board members, Mr. Riley, an old friend of my dad's, shook his head slowly, looking at Lyle with disappointment. Lyle, we've known your family for years, he said, his voice heavy. This isn't just some rivalry. These are serious allegations. Lyle's smirk faded, replaced by a flicker of panic. Look, I don't know what Fergus has been telling you, but he's blowing this out of proportion. I was only doing what was best for the company. Best for the company? I spat, feeling a rush of anger. Or best for your own bank account? I found transfers to personal accounts under your name, Lyle. You were stealing from us, from our family. My mother gasped, covering her mouth. My father looked at Lyle, his face a mix of shock and betrayal. Lyle's face turned red, and he looked around the room, clearly realizing he was trapped. But instead of apologizing or admitting anything, he crossed his arms, sneering. Fine, he snapped. Maybe I took a little. But I deserved it. I've put just as much into this business as you, Fergus. You've always had everything handed to you, while I was the one left in your shadow. You were stealing, my father said quietly, his voice laced with hurt. From the family. From everyone here. You think that's justifiable? Lyle opened his mouth to argue, but Mr. Riley cut him off. I think we've seen enough, he said, nodding to the other board members. Let's put it to a vote. They voted him out, unanimously. In less than 5 minutes, Lyle went from co-owner to disgraced former employee. He tried to protest, to claim he was being set up, but no one was listening. The evidence was all there, and everyone in that room could see the truth. As he stormed out, he threw one last glare in my direction. You'll regret this, Fergus, he hissed. You think you're so righteous, but you're just a coward, hiding behind your little rules. I met his glare with a calm I didn't know I had. Maybe, I said. But at least I'm honest. With that, he left, slamming the door behind him. After the meeting, my parents and I sat in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over us. My father looked at me, his eyes filled with sorrow. I'm sorry, son, he said quietly. I didn't know. I never imagined he'd do something like this. I put a hand on his shoulder, feeling the anger and hurt start to fade. It's over now, Dad, I replied. We'll be okay. And for the first time in years, I believed it. The business was safe, my family knew the truth, and Lyle had made his choice. As for me? I went back to work, rebuilding the trust he'd broken, one day at a time. And in the end, I realized that some things, honesty, loyalty, family, were worth more than anything he could have taken.